Did you look at your timeline? Here's mine. You'll remember that while the story is set in the wilderness, according to the theory that you're reading about this week, the book of Deuteronomy was not written then, but instead went through two different editions. First, in the time of the Judean king Josiah, who ruled while the Assyrian Empire was placing pressure on the southern kingdom of Judah, and after the northern kingdom had already been destroyed. And Deuteronomy went through a second edition during the exile, after parts of Judah had been forcibly removed to live in Babylonia. What this means for reading Deuteronomy is explained by Brent Strawn in the Theological Bible Commentary. His claim is that Deuteronomy must therefore be read on at least three levels. First of all, in the literary setting of the wilderness itself. Secondly, in the historical setting of Josiah. And thirdly, in the historical setting of the exile. That is, Strong is arguing that we could look at any passage in the book of Deuteronomy and at least think about the two final settings. What would this have meant during the time of Josiah? What would it have meant during the period of the exile? I would update Strong just slightly and suggest that Deuteronomy must always be read on at least four levels: the literary setting of the exile, the historical setting of Josiah, the historical setting of the exile, and our own historical setting. As we move forward in the class, we'll begin to pay more and more attention to our own concerns now that we have a good grounding in trying to understand the realities of ancient Israel. Once you feel that you have a good grasp of the book of Deuteronomy, you're then ready to look at a collection that scholars call in this tongue-tripping way the Deuteronomistic history. Listen to that several times on the video till you can pronounce it yourself. Deuteronomistic history. You might imagine why a class one year wrote me a song all about the Deuteronomistic history, and they made it rhymed with supercalifragilistic. Deuteronomistic. It's important not only to pronounce the word, but to understand what it is. As you know from your readings, this is the title that scholars give to four really big books of the Hebrew Bible, the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. It's important to note that the Deuteronomistic history refers only to those four books, including 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. It doesn't refer to all of the books in the historical section of the Christian canon. It leaves out Ruth, Ezra, Nehemiah, Chronicles. It refers only to Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. According to this understanding, the book of Deuteronomy, which closes out the Pentateuch, had some spillover effect into the books that follow it, both at least initially in the Christian canon, but throughout in the Jewish canon. That the story that is told from Joshua through Kings is told in light of the ideas of the book of Deuteronomy. Review, for example, Collins, page 95. He's trying to suggest that these books, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, went through the same double redaction as the book of Deuteronomy. In fact, that they were edited in light of the ideas and themes of the book of Deuteronomy. That became the school or the perspective from which all of the materials in Joshua through Kings were put together. And before you move forward in the video, see if you can see that for yourself. How can you see the themes, vocabulary, and theology of Deuteronomy in the books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings? I've offered a few passages in Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, and I would encourage you to stop at this stage, go to these passages, and see if you can find any of those lists of things that characterize Deuteronomy reflected here. Look for vocabulary, look for theology. In what way are these passages in Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings Deuteronomistic? How do they bear the distinctive markers of the book of Deuteronomy? See if you can also understand the claims made by Collins on page 95, that these stories in Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings have gone through a double redaction, that like the book of Deuteronomy, we could read them on the level of the stories themselves, we could read them in light of the realities at the time of the Judean king Josiah, and we could read them in light of the realities of the exile. This is incredibly important and an idea that we'll work on for the weeks ahead, that these stories have a clear ideological character, that what we will read in Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings are not attempts to simply give us just what happened, but instead a theologically crafted story that attempts to get across a sermon point that is the same sermon point as the book of Deuteronomy. I think about it this way, that the book of Deuteronomy tells the theology. It tells us to love Yahweh alone and to worship only in Jerusalem. It tells us what will happen to the Israelites if they fail to worship Yahweh alone and if they do worship Yahweh alone. The books of the Deuteronomistic history, Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, show that theology by offering Israel's history as a series of examples. That is, these books use Deuteronomy's theology as a template to explain the history of Israel from the time of the entry of the land to the exile. As we move forward in reading Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, then we'll always keep different layers of the story in mind. Sometimes we'll look at what we might learn about the people in the story, Joshua, the Judges, the kings of Israel. But we'll always ask the important question of who has told us this story and why have they told it to us the way that they're telling? Why would it have been important to those who wrote during the time of Josiah to tell the story this way? Why would it have been important to the people in the exile to hear the story this way? And so we'll always be asking not only about what's in the story, but why and how it is told the way that it is. So, as we go through Joshua and Kings, we'll read on multiple levels. The text itself, the historical setting of the Josianic period, the historical setting of the exile, and our own setting. Yes, we'll pay attention to our own interests as we move forward in this material.